the Quaestor facilitation guide. A couple things that we saw last year: facilitator mindset, something to read before we get to Balfour, and while we're at Balfour to remind us what the mindset of being a facilitator should be, get us in the right place. And then the curriculum, which last year had more suggestions. This year, and I know this will be a little bit different for the old guys, but and it's not that the guide has to script every step of the way where you go with your conversations. For you guys that have been doing this a long time, I know you got your styles. I know you got the things you like to do. You can still do those things, but we really want to try and maintain focus on the new content, incorporating in those discussions that we're used to being in, and getting some fresh ideas potentially on how to up our game as facilitators. And real quick, before I go through officer discussion group 1, for those that are online, you can see the cover page of the Team Quaestor Facilitation Guide. I'm going to scroll down here, and I just want you guys to kind of see and hear a lot of the same material is in it. You can see our team and contact info's in there. The 2018 Team Quaestor schedule is already in there. And again, this is on the team website. You can download. You can see what the schedule is going to be for us. Facilitator mindset, the curriculum. And then this is what I wanted you to see is when we get into this discussion for officer group 1, not only are there questions in there to kind of tip off, hey, this is how we kind of get the ball rolling. And for the new guys, this is key. This is how we get our conversation started in each individual session. But when you get a chance to see the manual, if you're not seeing it now, there are red notes in there to kind of help you in your discussion, taking notes, tying in different concepts. You can see here on the first one, doing an introduction and icebreakers. You can see, and I'm going to show you this here in just a second too, it references the Team Quaestor Facilitation Notebook. This is something I'm going to print out for you guys so you can have, so as you're going through the curriculum, as you're going through your discussions, I'll flip the screen here so you can see the notebook. It says right in the curriculum, in the notebook on this page, here you can write down your notes on the discussion. So in officer discussion group 1, the first thing we're going to do is introductions and icebreakers. We want to get to know these guys, what their name is, where they're from, something interesting about them that we can use later, so they know we're paying attention to them. Trying to find out what takeaways they want to get from Balfour. That's in our manual. In our notebook that we can have sitting right next to us, it's got individual boxes for each guy that just has name, expectation, takeaway, interesting fact. And as the facilitator, you can now have this sitting right next to your manual that's helping you guide your conversation and jot this stuff down. And you can do it while the conversation's going, so there's no break in the conversation. Guy mentions his name, you write it down. He says what his expectation is, you jot a note. And that way, when you get done with the session or you're moving into another conversation in a future session, you can take a look at these notes and begin incorporating what was said back into your conversations as needed. So that's something that's a little bit different this year that I really want to test out and see how it goes for you guys. I think it's going to be helpful. So when we get into our officer discussion group 1, we will have just had an opening core, and the opening core is going to be very similar to last year. It's going to be brief. It's going to have a keynote address, and the keynote address is going to focus on general leadership and the values of Sigma Chi. To do that, I've called upon Brother Dick Hester, our past Grand Consul, to be invited to deliver that keynote, probably hopefully 15 to 20 minutes, and he has accepted that. So on day 1, our Quaestors get to hear from past Grand Consul Dick Hester and open up with a talk on leadership itself. That's going to tie into our officer discussion, but more so after our second core, it gets into the Sigma Chi leadership model. So I thought that would be a nice way to get started. Dick will give his presentation. We'll get the guys out to the different faculty groups, into your small groups, and you guys can get started with group one. That's going to be laying the foundation for your discussions throughout Balfour. This is where you get to set the tone, the culture of your group. It'll include the introductions and icebreakers like we're used to doing. We want to get the expectations of not just the undergrads, but you as the facilitator as well. It gives you the opportunity to set the tone and the environment for that discussion group. And you're going to get a feel from the guys in your group, you know, what their demeanor is, what their style is, who's the quiet guy, who's the one that talks too much. You know, that gives you a foundation to build on for future discussions. That's going to come out in this group, and we're going to take notes on that so that we can reflect on it and be ready for our next session. I put in here because I think, as was true with most first impressions, this session will begin to form the perceptions the undergrads have for the future of not just our discussions that we have with them for Quaestor or your chapter, but for Balfour as a whole. You're the most important person at Balfour as their facilitator. So we really want to make sure that we go through the content, we understand what the purpose of this opening group is, debrief the keynote address, include those lessons into the conversation, and make sure that we're getting a solid footing moving forward into Balfour. I already kind of mentioned the Team Quaestor Facilitation Notebook, but here's a slide on that real quick. You can see where the notebook is set up to go in conjunction with the discussion group. And it's just, again, an opportunity for you to not mess up your book that usually doesn't have enough room to write in anyhow, and have something sitting right next to it that allows you to take notes that you can reflect on during the conversation or after. So real quick, I'll pause right there and just make sure I haven't lost anybody on the facilitation guide and the facilitation notebook and what their purpose is. Everybody good? And also, I think we do, but as a team, do we got a good feel for what Officer Discussion Group 1's about? Awesome. Continuing with this Officer Discussion Group 1, as I mentioned, we're going to debrief the keynote address and the lessons within it. We want to start to make a connection between those lessons from the keynote to our success in our office. So we're talking about leadership. We're going to bring those lessons into being Quaestor, and not just being Quaestor, but being a leader of our chapter. And before we get out of this session, we want to make sure that the undergrads have at least thought of a few personal or officer goals they want to achieve during the term of their office. And we don't need to get really high depth into that during this session. It's just putting it into their mindset that, hey, we're going to be talking about some goal setting. You know, let's get one or two things that you want to work on. And then as they decompress that session, maybe at lunch or, you know, when they have a little bit of free time, they can start thinking about that goal or whatever and how that is going to translate into their year, and bring that thought process into the next session, especially when we start talking about leadership. Good question. All right, guys, we've got course session 2 popping up on the screen here, values-based leadership. This is going to be the first part of the curriculum, the continuum curriculum that's going to show up in Team Quaestor and the rest of the divisions. Again, we will be presenting this in our division, and as you can see, it says it's going to be presented by Stuart Walters. And unfortunately, Stu is on a flight right now and is not with us, but he is going to be diving into this content, and he may or may not be reaching out to a couple of you to ask for help with this session. But we kind of went through the values-based leadership in our last call, so we'll just kind of fly through this. The point is to present to the guys that Sigma Chi leadership starts with the 7 virtues of Sigma Chi. It will evolve down into what they're calling the 4 critical dimensions. That is self, others, action, and community. These are kind of the 4 dimensions in which they think our leadership should exist. And as these different focuses pop up on the screen here, you can see each one of these critical elements has a particular focus that ties to a virtue And this is going to be the foundation of Sigma Chi leadership training moving forward. Stu is going to present that, and I'm going to move past that real quick to get into Officer Discussion Group 2, because this is where we are going to start decompressing that conversation and breaking it down. So when we get into Officer Discussion Group 2, we're really getting into the Sigma Chi leadership model and what it looks like moving forward for the fraternity. So as you can see, our manual is going to be set up to help with that conversation. You can see the questions listed there. Let's start with a debrief of the Sigma Chi leadership presentation and what was the takeaway the undergrads got from it. Okay, we already kind of know from the previous discussion with the undergrads who they are, what their goals are, what expectations they have, what they're trying to accomplish at Balfour. Now, as we start to break down what their takeaways are from the leadership model discussion and presentation, now we can start using that information for ourselves as facilitators to tie it back to what they're here for Balfour anyway. More than likely, they want leadership development. They're going to find it in this model. So we want to get their takeaway thoughts from the presentation itself. We want to kind of get into them with them, at least this year. Why do they believe Sigma Chi has developed this leadership model? This came straight from the model itself and the breakdown of the curriculum. They want us to ask this question. And in my opinion, and I wrote this in the notes here, you know, we all have common vision. We all have common mission. We have common purpose. We have common virtue. We have all these commons in Sigma Chi. It would make sense that our leadership belief, our leadership process is the same as well. So we want to get them to kind of come to that realization. And we want to start diving into the model itself, looking at the values and saying, okay, what of these values have you already witnessed in a mentor or a leader? And what was the outcome of that situation? Let's get them thinking about them seeing this for themselves personally in their own lives. We're going to be tying that into their experience as a leader moving forward. If they've seen it, they can probably replicate it. If they understand the way Sigma Chi sees it and how we should do it, they have a better chance of success exemplifying it themselves. Again, on the presentation here, you can see the Team Quaestor Facilitation Notebook. Just again, this is new content. This is going to be, you know, a new type of conversation to facilitate for a lot of us. Here in the notebook are some notes. Let's write down the takeaways. Let's identify what virtues they think are going to be tested the most, because we're going to ask them to identify that. You've got this sitting next to you. You can see in there what the 4 critical dimensions are and a little bit of a breakdown of what those are and how they tie back into our virtues. I thought it was important to give you that. And again, we can, as you guys chew up this content, give me feedback. This is just shit that I've created to try and help you. And if we need to modify it, we can modify it. But I thought it would be nice to take those 4 critical dimensions, tie the virtues they want us to tie back into it right here in the notebook, so you guys don't have to keep flipping pages back and forth. You've got it right there while you're having the discussion. So hopefully that makes sense. Are there any questions on this discussion group 2, Sigma Chi leadership? You know, I know you guys probably have to chew up the content and we'll have more questions in the future, but just the overall, this is the goal here, present the content, debrief it. Are there any questions on that? Okay, seeing none. As we continue through that discussion, and this discussion is the last part of our training today on the curriculum. As we continue through that discussion, we've already talked about the model itself and debriefed it. Now we want to get into which of those virtues, which of those values in the model do you identify with most? And we want to ask, which ones do you think are going to be tested most during your time as Quaestor? Now we want to take these leadership concepts and tie them directly back to the individual, tie them directly back to the officer and the situations that they're going to face as Quaestor. And this gives us the opportunity to help them through that. Some of them, they haven't even taken over the position yet, but in the discussion, they're going to start to see some of the challenges they're going to have, and we can start to relate back how the Sigma Chi leadership model, the virtues, those 4 critical dimensions tie into how they're going to be successful navigating that position. We haven't really broken all of this down yet. On the bottom here, you can see there's a personal development exercise. This is a small group breakout with discussions. The curriculum that we're supposed to get is supposed to have the model for that. This is something where, you know, you've got a group of 9 guys, you break them into 3 groups of 3 or however you want to do it, and just get them talking a little bit together amongst themselves about leadership in general, the best leadership concepts they've read about, what inspires them most and why, and just having a little bit of a leadership dialogue with their peers. So we'll talk about that more when we get more of a breakdown of what that's going to be, and we'll get some feedback from guys that have had similar discussions, see how we can best do that. In this session, we'll have an opportunity to connect the leadership discussion to our guiding principles and ethical standards in the Quaestor manual, as we talked earlier. And this page here that I'm showing you, these 2 last things, the guiding principles, ethical standards tie in, and the leadership assessment exercise, you may or may not have time, depending on your conversation, to do that during this session. So we'll leave that up to the experience you have in that discussion. Leave it up to your discretion if you have time to do it or if you're going to do it. But these are 2 things that can tie into that discussion that makes sense: guiding principles, ethical standards, and the leadership assessment, which guys on the team from last year, remember that was a gift from Rod Smalling. So thank you again, Rod. And I'll flip over here real quick to our facilitation guide for that discussion. You can see on the page where it talks about the leadership assessment right here. And of course, in conjunction with that, if we go to our notebook, the leadership assessment work sheet is right in the notebook itself with the assessment worksheet and the facilitator instructions. So as you guys chew that content up on your own a little bit more and get familiar with it, I'm sure you'll have more questions. But Rod, we appreciate that from last year, and of course we wanted to include it in this year's curriculum as well.